Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to a very exciting panel we have here on the Export-Import Bank. My name is Marco Poisler. I am Chief Operating Officer of UTC Overseas, a global transportation and logistics company headquartered in Houston with 46 offices in 26 countries. I'd like to make a quick introduction on our panelists. First, we have Rami Tuma. He's president of Sika Exporter, founded in 2002. They export U.S.-made oil field equipment to the North African region. Sika represents a group of domestic manufacturers and help them sell service and training. And we'll hear from him about how he has actually continued with EXIM Bank on some of their products through the shutdown. We have John Masterston, treasurer of Chicago Bridge and Iron. His team helped arrange financing for $30 billion for large capital projects, of which $10 billion came from the U.S. Export-Import Bank. John worked with the Trump administration transition team to demonstrate and express the importance of EXIM Bank on capital projects. We have Captain Bill Schubert, who sailed for 13 years on both breakbulk and bulk vessels and obtained the master's unlimited license at the age of 29. He served as a special assistant in the second Reagan administration and then was appointed by President George W. Bush and unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate to serve as U.S. Maritime Administrator. In 1995, he established the International Trade and Transportation to provide tied ECA consulting to project sponsors, EPC contractors, and lending institutions. His firm is one of the only consulting firms that specializes in operations, compliance, and eligibility requirements of the U.S. EXIM Bank for project finance. This conference in 2001 awarded him a Lifetime Achievement Award, but he is restless, and the past 5 years was a real demonstration of that. He worked tirelessly the past 5 years to renew the U.S. EXIM Bank charter and obtain Senate confirmation of the board to reach. And recently, he was appointed to serve on the board for the Coalition for U.S. Jobs, which advocates for the U.S. Export-Import Bank. We have a very distinguished guest here as well, the Senior Vice President and Chief Banking Officer of the Export-Import Bank, Stephen Renna. He was appointed by the White House in his position, and previously he served as Executive Director of the Advocacy Center of the U.S. Department of Commerce. Under his leadership, advocacy facilitated more than 100 contract wins for U.S. companies that include more than $75 billion in U.S. export content. Before we begin, just a sense of the audience, how many people in here were actually born in Houston? I've been 15 years in Houston, and every time I try to find, it's very hard to find native Houstonians, even in Houston. Does anybody know who the graduate program of Rice University was named after? Jesse H. Jones, Jesse Jones Performing Arts Center, a very important Houstonian for us and for the topic today. Also for Breakbulk, he helped fund, he was a major Houstonian in development. He found in the 1930s funding for the Houston Ship Channel, and 80 years ago he served as Secretary of Commerce. And he was one of the architects of the U.S. Export-Import Bank 80 years ago. But we're not here to talk about history. We're here to talk about the present and the future. We do have a board back, and we're quite excited about what it means specifically to our global supply chain. There's much that the bank recently has been doing that is historical. The bank now has its first woman as a chairman, Kimberly Reed. It recently approved the largest direct loan, $5 billion, and it's in Africa, which is the future. So today we can be positive, and the importance it means to our global supply chain. And it's more than just what it means for U.S. jobs. It's not about necessarily the nationalism. Although, to quote Jesse Jones, the bank's first aid went to American manufacturer and the American workman, whose job often depended upon whether a plant's front office was successful in bidding overseas work. But if you look at transactions on $5 billion on a $20 billion Mozambique project, the entire global supply chain benefits by having EXIM Bank. Steve, EXIM Bank has been important to Breakbulk, to many members of this audience. Speaking as well as the Export Competitive Maritime Council, which was referred previously here. We have a number of members in our audience here. This organization, a shipping-related organization, was very active in the reauthorization, and I see a number of members here, such as Scott, James, that were very active. I personally would like to acknowledge and thank also the shareholders of UTC, Brian and Elena Posthumus, for their efforts the past 4 years in Washington. I'd like to invite Steve to give us some remarks.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. Captain Bill informed me earlier that there hasn't been an EXIM official at a Breakbulk conference addressing the conference since the Bush administration, correct, Bill? So I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to be able to be here at future Breakbulk conferences as well. Before I begin my comments talking about EXIM, I do want to introduce a very important person who works on the EXIM team in project finance, and that's Paula Swain, who's sitting in the front row. Paula, please stand up. As you saw, Paula raised her hand when asked who was born in Houston, so I was glad she did that, because those of you that are interested in pursuing how EXIM can assist you, Paula is one of the few people that we actually have around the country in particular places. We only have like 17 field offices, I believe, but Paula is dedicated here in Houston, where there's, as you all know, a tremendous amount of manufacturing and engineering and exports. It's one of the largest ports in this country and one of the largest points of export for U.S. goods and services. So what I would like to speak to you about today is the Trump administration's goal with respect to helping U.S. companies sell products around the world, invest around the world, and otherwise trade around the world. As you know, President Trump is a very strong proponent of bilateral trade. He is not a fan of multilateral trade agreements. And because he has not chosen not to participate in multilateral trade agreements, we need to strengthen our bilateral activities with countries. So the Trump administration has an initiative to help U.S. companies around the world do this. And it's employing a whole-of-government approach to doing this. So what I mean by whole of government is making sure that all agencies that can assist U.S. companies doing business abroad, selling abroad, winning foreign government contracts, is what I did at the Advocacy Center at the Commerce Department, helping arrange financing, breaking down market access barriers, facilitating relationships between U.S. companies and foreign companies. That's what they want to bring the whole of government approach to bear on helping you all do that. So whether you're talking about the State Department that's dealing with our strategic initiatives around the world, and as part of that is trying to open up markets for commercial activities, the Commerce Department, whose job is to break down market access barriers, help with relationships in countries for U.S. companies, and to advocate on foreign government contracts, or whether it's the Department of Energy, or that is trying to make sure that we are investing U.S. capital around the world and standing up energy around the world, or any other agency, including the financing agencies that are part of the U.S. government's portfolio. Some of you are aware of OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. It's now going to be called the Development Finance Corporation, the Trade Development Association, the Millennial Capital Corporation, and of course the EXIM Bank. These are combined all key elements of the financing arm of helping U.S. companies do business around the world. And I would say that EXIM is probably the most important. And I do know from my perspective in working at the Advocacy Center of the Department of Commerce, as we were trying to help companies with their bids on foreign government contracts, one of the things that constantly came up was foreign bidders had their government standing behind them with export credit agency financing. And because the EXIM Bank was not functioning because of a lack of a full board, we did not have that. So I saw directly, time and time again, the importance of EXIM by the fact that EXIM was not present. So EXIM is one of the cornerstones of the United States government's ability to help you do business overseas and invest. So what's our mission? Our mission specifically is to facilitate your exports by providing credit support to the borrowers who are looking to buy your products. And we do that in order to facilitate exports. So our eye is always on exports. That's the perspective in which we're helping. We're looking to borrowers around the world who may not have the full credit worthiness to be able to finance the acquisition of those products or services through the private capital markets. And the EXIM Bank can provide guarantee support and other products to that equation so it can facilitate exports. So I'm just going to go through for a few minutes what our EXIM products are generally to give you an idea of what we can and are doing for you. The first two products are on the small business side, and I'm gonna cue Rami on that because he's taken advantage of both these products. The first is an export credit insurance. So you are selling products around the world and you have accounts receivable. You want to be able to use those accounts receivable to pledge them for a line of credit at the bank, but the bank's concerned that the account receivable that you have is from a borrower in a country that they're concerned about the creditworthiness is of that. You can acquire export credit insurance from EXIM that will cover 85% of the value of those accounts receivables. So if you don't get paid, there's insurance. So then the banker is more comfortable in then using those as collateral, allowing you those collateral for its lines of credit. In addition to that, we provide directly to companies working capital loans. So you have the operating capital to capital to operate or to expand or to develop in ways that can enhance your exports. And I know when Rami gets a chance, he'll talk a little bit about how his company for years has benefited from both these products. What we also do is provide direct loan guarantees or loan guarantees when you have a company that is exporting a product or a service and you need to support that borrower's credit standing with the lender. We will provide to that lender a guarantee from EXIM that, again, enhances the credit worthiness and facilitates that financing. In addition to that, and what some of you may not know, and this is really where Paula comes in, is that we provide direct loans as well. In most cases, these direct loans are for project finance. So this is any kind of development project in another country that's going to have a stream of U.S. exports as part of that development. We can provide direct financing to that, and we do, and historically have done, I think, Paul, it's about $66 billion worth of project finance. The most recent example of project finance is that we are the lead lender in a consortium to develop in Mozambique LNG liquefaction development and liquefaction facility on behalf of what now is Total. It started off with Anadarko, but Anadarko sold its interest ultimately to Total. But the development of this LNG project in Mozambique is about a $25 billion project in the 20 billions of dollars. And we're financing a very large component of that, which is all linked to U.S. exports. So that's a big part of what we do on the development side, and I know there's another panel coming up talking specifically about LNG. I heard comments about LNG earlier. LNG intake infrastructure in countries is something that we're looking at financing. We're also looking at being able to finance offtake contracts themselves, which can all lead to further development of the infrastructure needed in countries that are looking to acquire LNG, provide the collateralization through those contracts that we support and that infrastructure for companies to develop their facilities here in the United States. A couple of other things that we provide financing to are engineering and feasibility studies, bid and performance bonds, and also some currency insurance. I mentioned how Houston is one of the largest exporting ports in the United States and a huge beneficiary of that. We are looking forward to being reauthorized by Congress and be fully functional for a number of years so we can facilitate that exporting on behalf of companies that are working through the point of Houston and using all the transportation and the logistic services that all you companies provide here. I did want to mention that EXIM is not an agency that receives an appropriation from Congress. We have to basically provide our own operating revenue through the fees that we collect through the transactions that we enter into. Congress does allow us the amount that we get to keep, and if we generate revenues in excess of the amount that Congress has said you get to keep in order to fund your operations, we remit that excess amount to Treasury. It's not part of our mandate, but it's part of what happens. And over EXIM's existence, there have been billions of dollars of revenue that has been remitted by EXIM to the U.S. Treasury. There has been $0 worth of taxpayer losses. Obviously, to the contrary, there's billions and billions of dollars worth of taxpayer enhancement as a result of EXIM's functioning. So I say that to just transition for a moment into the reauthorization circumstances that we're in with respect to our charter. So EXIM has been operating under a 5-year charter, which is 2015, so we're up for renewal. That charter actually was set to expire on September 30th, so we needed an act of Congress to reauthorize us for another period of time, 5 years. We're actually hearing proposals to reauthorize us for longer than that, up to 10, even 12 years. And so we're waiting for this act of Congress to happen. Typically, when EXIM is reauthorized, it is not done as a standalone bill. Sort of your old Civics 101, or how does a bill become law, doesn't really apply to EXIM. We tend to be a car on a larger train that is leaving the station, meaning another legislative vehicle that's larger that can carry us along. In this particular circumstance, we are tied to Congress's appropriation bills. So every year, Congress is supposed to basically pass the funding bills for all our agencies. So there are 12 appropriation bills that need to get passed. Congress has passed none of them, and it is supposed to have completed that action by September 30th. It has not done it. All these are being held up by issues like gun control, immigration, whether we're using funds from DOD to construct the wall, things that really don't have anything to do with spending caps, because actually the spending amounts have been generally agreed to. But it's these other, call them social issues, other economic issues that are basically holding up the whole ability for Congress to do its most fundamental job, and that is to fund the government. So our reauthorization was likely to be tied to whatever deal they came up with by September 30th in order to fund the government. So as many of you know, they haven't come up with a deal to fund the government. They said, we'll extend to November 21st, our fiscal year 19 spending levels. And in the process of doing that, they also extended EXIM's charter and other things like flood insurance to November 21st. So they basically buy themselves more time to do the homework that they didn't turn in on time on September 30th. So we are in a period right now in which we are hoping that Congress will ultimately have some sort of moment in which they will come together to pass an omnibus spending bill. And if they do that, and when they do that, it is very likely that EXIM's reauthorization will be part of that and will be enacted into law as part of that bill. We don't know at this point exactly what the terms of reauthorization will look like. The House and the Senate have not yet spoken. We have Democrats and Republicans not yet speaking to each other really about what should be in the reauthorization. I will say in the House, surprisingly, there's been a significant amount of bipartisan willingness to try to come to an agreement on an EXIM reauthorization. It's kind of broken down over just a couple of issues. And it may turn out that the House passes a Democrat partisan EXIM reauthorization, which is fine. I think it's great because it raises the profile of EXIM reauthorization. It puts it into play. The Senate's not likely to accept a partisan bill out of the House. We don't know what the Senate actually will do. They may just say, let's just kick out the authorization date for a certain number of years, and that's what we'll do, and turn to the House and say either take that or leave it and see what the outcome is of that. So that's kind of where we are right now. A number of folks, and I want to thank everybody who has been engaged in the initiative to get EXIM reauthorized, who have talked to lawmakers about this. We at EXIM cannot ask you to lobby, but if you ask us if what would be helpful, we can respond to that and direct you to different members of Congress, different committees on what to say. But I do want to thank all the companies that have been involved with supporting EXIM's reauthorization. So with that, I think my time's just about up, and we'll turn it back over to Marco for the panel.
Thank you, Steve. Rami, can you share with us, Steve referred about some of the products you were utilizing, even though we had an absence of a board.
Sure. Yeah, like Steve said, we use 2 of the XM products. I think to understand what we do, I've got to give you a little bit of background about my company. We are basically an exporting company. We export to North Africa. Our largest market by far is Algeria. Algeria has a real thirst for American engineered and manufactured American products. Made in the USA matters a lot still. It matters more sometimes overseas than it matters in our own country. We're the leaders in drilling technology. We're the leaders in drilling engineering. So they really want the materials and equipment that are manufactured here in the United States. Algeria, about 12 years ago, Algeria is the largest country in Africa as far as land size. And the national oil company of Algeria, Sonatrach, is the largest company in all of Africa. It's got about 250,000 employees. We sell to the Sonatrach subsidiaries, the drilling companies and the service companies of Sonatrach. About 12 years ago, Algeria instituted a public tender system. It's not all that different from bidding on a highway in the back of our newspapers here. The public tender system in Algeria is very complicated. There is a lot of American companies that would love to sell their products in Algeria, but may not know the language or the culture, or most importantly, how to navigate your way through the complicated tender system. Every project we quote into Algeria, and we quote about 250 projects a year, requires a bid bond. We go to EXIM Bank for that bid bond. Every successful project that we sign and sell into Algeria requires a performance bond. And that's 10% of the contract amount that's placed in the Algerian banks for 2 years. So if you're selling $50 million a year, all of a sudden you've got $5 million that's sitting in the Algerian banks that you can't touch for 24 months. That kills your cash flow. And that effectively is where EXIM Bank comes in for us. We have a line of credit with EXIM Bank. We put up a very small percentage of that performance bond. The line of credit is used for the balance of it, and it helps us keep our day-to-day operations flowing on a regular basis. That's far and away the number one product of EXIM that we use. And like Steve said, we also use their credit insurance. We ship between 100 to 130 different projects to Algeria every year. Every single one of those receivables is insured. We borrow against it for our line as well, and that helps keep us more flexible than usual.
Thank you. Bill, would you like to share some on some of the remarks from Steve?
Oh, yes. First of all, amen to everything you just said. But I wanted to make sure you knew that when in 2014-15, when the, let's just say, the Inside the Beltway Coalition was looking for grassroots, there's a lot of people here that put a lot of time and effort into that reauthorization, trying to get the board quorum established, and so this is your, grassroots group here, and the ECMC, U.S. Exporters Competitive Maritime Council, they were a very, very active part of that too. Now, just to comment on the current status, well, first of all, the last charter was an overwhelming supermajority in the House and Senate. It was there's just a few people that can hang, as you know, in Washington, can slow things down. But it was a supermajority in the House and a supermajority in the Senate. I think it's going to be the same thing this time around, but we got the wind a little bit at our backs. We have bipartisan bill in the Senate that we're still trying to get co-sponsors for. As you said, it's a 10-year reauthorization. It raises the limit, the lending limits to a healthy amount, and has a fix for in case there's a lapse in the quorum. There's a quorum fix in there. And the same likewise in the House. I agree with you that there is a supermajority still there in the House. But we're trying to make it a bipartisan bill. But I think the current version that I saw a couple of days ago, very much like the Senate, gets to the point, gets the bank reauthorized for 10 years. So we'll just continue working together, and but we need people in this room to stay engaged for a little longer. We don't want to be having to compete abroad, essentially against state governments, and you know who they are for these big projects. So that's my comment.
John, can you share how has your company had to do with the past 4 years without EXIM Bank with the full board?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It's, to go back, if I go all the way back to 2007, we had the largest direct loan in EXIM Bank's history with our project in Peru. We subsequently broke that record with a project in Colombia. Again, broke that record with another project in Papua New Guinea. And now we've got one of the biggest ones with Mozambique. But the last 2.5 years, 3 years, when there hasn't been a quorum involved, and to give a little bit of background, I work for a large EPC contractor. We bid mega projects around the world. Most of the tied ECA financings are anywhere between $1.5 to $7 or $8 billion. So when we look at a project, we start with our supply chain, and we have what we believe is a competitive advantage out of the U.S. So whenever we start looking at a particular area of the world, we start looking at saying, okay, well, how much supply chain can we come out of the U.S., and then we'll start filling in and trying to figure out our buckets as we look to, try to meet our clients' goals in terms of financing. And not having U.S. EXIM, without a quorum in the last couple of half years, we've essentially had to find homes for that valuable U.S. supply chain, content that we've had. That's given us a competitive advantage. If you think about it, a lot of our vendors and suppliers and people that we work with, we've developed relationships over decades. They've been dependable, repeatable, and we've been able to count on them. And it's forced us to go out and find new relationships in other parts of the world, just so the fact that we can qualify for a bid because our clients need the financing in order to make a project go forward. So EXIM Bank not having that quorum, it's a little bit like your, Houston Texans, and saying, okay, Houston Texans, I'm going to allow you to compete in the NFL, but I'm not going to allow you to play any home games. All your games are going to be on the road, and good luck with that. Let's see how you do. So there is a thing called home field advantage, and that's something that we haven't had in a while. And hopefully with what Steve has just mentioned and Bill has gotten, talked about, that we get that home field advantage again for our supply chain.
Add on to that. I'd like to add on to that. I think the point that he brings up is very important. The biggest change I've seen in my market, in my industry over the last 20 years has been the influx of Chinese manufacturers into the oil field. Not just Chinese, German companies, French companies. Should EXIM Bank go away, it doesn't mean the Chinese export banks are going to go away. It doesn't mean the Canadian export banks are going to go away, or the German or the French. Every one of these countries has a similar organization to help their manufacturers get their products shipped and sold overseas. So we would really be neutering ourselves by getting rid or by reducing what EXIM Bank does, because it's just going to empower our competition. I represent a group of American manufacturers. I look at my competition as being Chinese manufacturers and German manufacturers, and they would be the ones licking their lips if EXIM were to not be reauthorized the way we would want it to. So it's very important that we keep it going for those reasons.
Thank you. Steve, could you comment on the concept of additionality and how that with other ECAs and private finance?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was actually going to comment on Rami's point on that. This concept of additionality, I find it a bit of an awkward term, but basically we need, from a policy standpoint, to make sure that we're not displacing the private capital markets. We're not meant, as the government, to compete with our own private capital providers. Our mission is to provide that gap financing when you have a lender that's saying, I can't go all the way as far as is necessary with a particular borrower because of their credit or the amount that they need to finance, or a number of other reasons that the private capital market's going to be looking at that. As long as we can demonstrate that, we can make the determination that we are just providing additional financing, additionality to the equation. We're not displacing. However, there's another prong of that as well, and that's the Export Credit Agency competitive playing field out there that, Rami, you're referring to. There are, I think, 113 export credit agencies out there. China has 3, but other countries in Europe, like France and Germany and Italy and Spain and other countries around the world, have very active, aggressive export credit agencies. So we also can get engaged and not just be limited by the additionality part of the equation, but we can get engaged if there is another export credit agency financing a competitor's bid for a particular project or for the sale of a particular product.
And here's something just to add on that. Whenever you bring EXIM Bank into a deal with the other export credit agencies, this is a fact. They all of a sudden get very serious about your proposal because they know that EXIM Bank is doing the due diligence behind it. And there's a lot of other export credit agencies in the world that will rely on what EXIM Bank is doing behind the scenes in terms of evaluating the creditworthiness of a project and a borrower. So that's another advantage of what EXIM Bank brings to a lot of our deals.
And we always don't compete necessarily with ECAs. There are a number of ECAs that join us in financing consortium, where in most cases we are the lead ECA. The Mozambique LNG project is one of them. I think there are 5, maybe 6 ECAs involved in that LNG project. Other ECAs, particularly OECD ECAs, value what U.S. EXIM brings to the equation because of our expertise, because of our due diligence, because of the prestige of the United States into the equation, and often want to be involved with us and following behind us in these projects. So while we compete with other ECAs, we also work with other ECAs. The issue that we have a lot are non-OECD ECAs that are kind of in a race to the bottom kind of approach to provide the cheapest terms and present that type of uncompetitive playing field for United States companies.
Bill, you've helped many of us translate the finance world to the shipping world. Can you give us, what does it mean for cargo?
Well, it means we have, despite what some say, I think there's a big, especially in the Houston area, a big impact on facilitating the export of cargo from the United States. It is a tied export credit agency, tied to U.S. goods and services, including U.S. flag services. And but all that being said, and I'd like John to maybe comment on it too. With these bids that are out there, that you have to guarantee a certain amount of export credit agency financing. What do you do when there's not an EXIM bank? You just sort of addressed it, but
Yeah. So you talk to the other ECAs, and I can tell you I've never been so popular in the last 3 years with UK folks and the folks over at Saatchi in Italy and Hermes in Germany and the Koreans and Kexim and even the Chinese. And their message back to me, while the quorum was an issue and EXIM couldn't participate in some of these transactions, was hey, we would like to talk to you. And really, every country is in that race for global leadership in exports. And in 2019, every country is stepping on the gas pedal as fast as possible to promote growth in their own economies. So while the other export credit agencies, they were sympathetic to EXIM's plight, they were very willing to try to soak up the additional capacity, which means I was simply displacing supply chain that would ordinarily come from the U.S. to somewhere else in the world, which put us at a competitive disadvantage for a number of reasons that I spoke to just a moment ago.
John, can you expand on that in the past 10 years of this 4-year period, what it meant in terms of the scale?
Yeah, well, most of our successful projects, well, I would just say just about all of them had EXIM Bank involved, and having this 3-year hiatus is quieted things down. There just hasn't been a lot of activity for us because we haven't been able to tap into what I mentioned before, our typical dependable supply chain, and it's forced us to go out in other areas of the world and contract with new entities and new suppliers and try to formulate new relationships. And there's a whole host of growing pains associated when you have to do that. But primarily it's been, how do we move things from the U.S. to other parts of the world? And that's just it's a terrible conversation to have because it really wasn't necessary. And it's not, Steve mentioned, it's not EXIM Bank as displacing anybody. It's just the fact that these other export credit agencies had to take up the capacity that EXIM would have ordinarily provided. So it's critical to have them back. It's critical to have the reauthorization go through and to ensure that the quorum and the board stays intact for the foreseeable future, because our clients, when they come to us for a potential project, they want a financing plan, involved in the bid, and they want it to be credible, right? And when EXIM Bank in the headlines, a lot of our clients, they were concerned for obvious reasons, and we needed to find other backup plans to be able to deal with that uncertainty.
Marco, I think it might be helpful to the audience if I explain the quorum issue, and so you understand the implications of that. The board of directors of EXIM are presidentially nominated directors. When you are nominated by the president, you have to go through the Senate confirmation process. So you have to go through the relevant committee of jurisdiction, then you have to go to the floor for a vote. So Kimberly Reed, I think when she was here at Discover Global Markets, I think talked to people about her venture that she went through that process. A few opponents of EXIM in the Senate have used the confirmation process by exercising their rights to filibuster to prevent the Senate from voting on the slate of EXIM directors. Basically, they register objections that need to be overridden by 2/3 votes of the Senate and a certain amount of hours of debate time, a very significant amount of hours of debate time that the Senate has to consume in order to get to that vote of 2/3 majority. Okay, so it's a very effective tool that senators have to block legislation or nominations from getting to the Senate floor. So one senator in particular, Senator Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, exercised that because he's an opponent of the bank, and he said, I will block any nominees for the board of directors of EXIM from getting to the Senate floor. And he did it in the Obama administration, and he did it in the Trump administration for a period of 3.5 to almost 4.5 years. EXIM did not have a slate of directors on its board. And what does that mean? Well, like any corporation that has bylaws, you have to have a certain quorum of boards of directors to approve any actions of the company. Same at EXIM. In order for EXIM to have approved any kind of financing over $10 million, it required board approval. Well, we didn't have a board, and therefore EXIM was limited to doing only small business related working capital loans, export credit insurance. Very important. The Rami's company, unfortunately, we were able to continue that, but for larger projects or larger sales of goods and services, we were not able to do that. So one of the things we're hoping to get in the reauthorization package, which Bill alluded to, is a quorum fix that would say in law that if the quorum of the board expires because of their appointment periods have expired, and there are not new board members that have yet been nominated and confirmed by the Senate, there are ex officio members that could step in and serve that role. And, for example, the Secretary of Commerce and the U.S. Trade Rep are ex officio members to the EXIM Bank. So they could step in if there was a gap in board nominees and perform that function. So EXIM wouldn't essentially be shut down for all but its small business products. So I just want to make sure everybody understood that it's a lot of inside Washington baseball, but it's what happened to us, and it's maddeningly frustrating because it took President Trump going to Senator McConnell and saying, Senator McConnell, you need to make it a priority of the Senate's floor business to bring up these EXIM board of directors so EXIM can be functioning again. And Senator McConnell then turns to the president and says, okay, Mr. President, you understand if I have to consume X amount of hours of Senate floor time on this, then that's time that I can't spend on judges that you've nominated. So you understand that's the trade-off. So President Trump had to say, yes, I will make that trade-off in order to get EXIM board members up. But you can see if every time we need a new board without the quorum fixed, some senator who opposes EXIM can play that game and require, a president coming in, at 30,000 foot level to have to make that appeal to the majority leader of the Senate to move his or her nominees. And that's a very difficult political lift to happen. And that's why one senator was able to frustrate EXIM's board confirmations for over 4 years.
Steve, that's an excellent overview. Bill, can you share on the National Association of Manufacturers and the Coalition for U.S. Jobs comment on what Steve has shared with us?
Sure.
Effort?
What do you want me to share?
On the efforts of the National Association of Manufacturers.
Well, we have a very disciplined coalition, a couple coalitions, but I'll speak to the one about NAM. But we have weekly calls to coordinate efforts on the Hill to get these get both the House and Senate to pass their bills, and then to attach it to something important that needs to be passed on a must-pass basis. So I'm very optimistic. I know I really thank Breakbulk for having a XM panel pretty much consistently the last several years, but it was pretty depressing, I'll tell you. And these are capital projects, people that need to do transactions above $10 million. So we were all directly impacted by it. But I have to say we're very optimistic that we're going to get the charter renewed, extended, without a big disruption to some of these pending projects, which the board still needs to vote on. But NAM, the National Association of Manufacturers, the Chamber of Commerce have done a really good job.
And Steve, just to jump on your point, you talked about the $10 million limit for small businesses, and I just want to point out, because I think there's a misconception, when we start talking about these larger capital projects that go into the $1 to $5 billion, $6 billion, $7 billion ranges, it's just not a transaction between one large company to EXIM Bank. EXIM Bank, on large capital projects, we submit a thing called an acquisition list. So any project that we typically have, we will typically have 2,000 to 3,000 small businesses participating in that large capital project for their piece of their piece of equipment or their supply. So I mean, it's a whole collection of different companies out there that make up these projects. It's not just one company facing off against the bank.
And I just want to comment on that because I've been in to see Steve and the chief of staff to talk about this. If we just were able to report the supply chain, they have to do an annual report to Congress, and there's a breakdown by state and district and all that, the beneficiaries. But we need to be able to report the supply chain to Congress. I think if they understood that, I think it would, you'd get rid of the Boeing Bank title that it unfairly has. People are using that, and we need to be able to report the beneficiaries that are in this audience, and the rules right now don't let us do it.
And one thing I would add to that is that if you are a company in a supply chain, you can use our working capital loans. As long as you can represent your part of the supply chain of a deal or a project that is being considered by EXIM or EXIM financing. If you're in that supply chain, you can use it, even though you're not exporting directly, you can go and get a working capital loan.
And that's critical to our supply chain, because if you think about it, when you have a large project like that, they don't hit every day, right? These are things that maybe come every couple of years, and all of a sudden you're calling upon your supplier to, 4 times X, 5 times X their annual supply of what they usually, provide to the marketplace. So they need those types of working capital loans to be able to navigate and handle those large orders.
Steve, can you expand on your role in the Department of Commerce and the advocacy and some of the other agencies such as Power Africa, and how that works with EXIM Bank to support U.S. companies?
Yes, and basically, again, this goes back to my comments on the whole of government approach of the Trump administration. I always say this to people, particularly when I was at the Advocacy Center and we're advocating for a particular deal. Who wrote the book, The Art of the Deal? President Trump. Okay, so President Trump loves deals. He loves getting deals done. This has permeated the entire political ranks of all agencies, that the president wants to get deals done. So this is what is the catalyst for this whole of government approach to support U.S. companies that are looking to do business abroad, invest, trade with, win contracts for, all the things that I described. Okay, so there is this single-mindedness of all the political appointees in all these agencies, that is what our goal is. And our role as political appointees is to utilize the career staff in order to focus them on what is the particular mission of an administration. What is that particular focus? So we provide the strategic leadership for the career staff to help us execute on that. So the strategic thinking across agencies and government is to help U.S. companies win deals, whatever those deals are, as I just described. So we have this whole of government interagency approach that we're coordinating with all of them. We have initiatives like Prosper Africa. Basically, this is a recognition of the importance of the United States needing to be present in Africa from a business standpoint. We are not present on that continent near enough commercially, for where that continent is going as far as its economic growth. It will be the fastest growing continent, or if not already is the fastest growing continent in the world. And there are strategic reasons for us to be there. You've all heard the stories of China's Belt and Road and how China has just an enormous presence in Africa in financing projects of all kinds. The presence as a result of that, not only economically, but strategically, that China has. So we need, one, as I was talking about earlier, because of President Trump's view of bilateral trade versus multilateral trade, you see everything is going on with China, that we need to be using a whole of government approach to help companies with respect to that. And then we need to also be working to strategically focus in areas around the world where U.S. companies and the U.S. government need to be focused from not only an economic but a strategic standpoint. And Africa is a great example of that.